Look at all those grains. Woohoo! A refreshing, flavored water.
Yeah, cheers.
It's so good.
Very good. Welcome back to the Fermentation Adventure. If you've been around here for a while, you know we've made all kinds of incredible fermented drinks. Some that require some kind of starter culture, like our wildly popular ginger ale, made from a ginger bug starter culture. Others that you don't even need any kind of starter culture, like our Mexican pineapple tepache, our apple cider. But today we are making another fermented drink that's made with a starter culture, and it's called Water Kefir.
Super healthy for you, like really high in probiotics. And if you like the taste of kombucha, you can actually make this in a way that tastes a little bit like a mild kombucha. So today, we're gonna go over what is water kefir, what are water kefir grains, and how to make a basic water kefir.
So let's get into it. Join us on this journey to explore the world of fermentation.
If you'd like to learn how to make ferments like these, start now by clicking subscribe and hitting that bell so you don't miss a thing. So first things first, what is water kefir?
So water kefir is a fermented drink, like a bunch of the other fermented drinks that we've made. But this one is a little bit different. It uses a starter culture called these water kefir grains. So I put grains in quotes because they're kind of like a gelatinous looking crystal-like substance, and they even jiggle a little bit. And what you do is you take these water kefir grains and you add sugar water over them, let them ferment for a little while, and you have this really good drink.
Yum.
And normally when you hear water kefir or even just the term kefir, you probably are thinking of milk kefir. And normally if you go to the grocery section, maybe like the dairy section, you might even see a big bottle of kefir, and that's milk kefir. Today we're making water kefir, which doesn't have any kind of lactose. And there's two different types of grains. These are water kefir grains, and you would have milk kefir grains. And they're two different things.
If you're lactose intolerant, this water kefir is going to be perfect for you.
So the history around water kefir is a little bit vague. Nobody really knows for sure, kind of like a kombucha SCOBY. But generally what's accepted is it originated down in Mexico on the prickly pear cactus. And it's like these little hard nodules that are on the prickly pear, and they would harvest them and then make kind of like a sugary drink out of it.
And thankfully, we can just buy these online. So you can either buy them already like in a wet package and you can get started right from there, or you can buy them dried and rehydrate them yourself. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
So water kefir grains is our starter culture for today. What's interesting about this, it's made up of dozens of bacteria and yeast. These are all held together by a carbohydrate called a polysaccharide. So it makes these little jelly crystal-like looking sacs. And by the way, you might hear water kefir grains, but they go by many other different names, like tibicos, Japanese water crystals, what else?
California bees.
Yeah, aqua gems. And then there's all of these other ones in all these other different languages.
And we bought these online. And in case you're interested in where we bought them, we'll put a link to the same place we got them from. What really is awesome about these is they multiply like crazy when you start making water kefir drinks. So that means you really only need to buy this once ever.
Yeah, you'll have so many of these, you'll probably have to have like a little hotel. They just keep on multiplying.
You might start donating to your friends.
Oh yeah. Actually, once they taste this, they're probably going to want some of these so they can make it themselves.
Wait, you could actually eat these too.
Yeah.
If you end up with that many more, eat them. Okay, now that we have a good understanding of what water kefir is, let's get to making some.
So to make this, what we did is we ordered them online. And when we ordered them, we only ordered enough to make 1 quart. When you make 1 quart, it makes almost about 2 of these soda bottles. When you receive them, they come in like a little pouch of sugar water. And they say to make them within 7 days, because if you wait a little bit longer, it probably takes a little bit longer to reactivate them.
In fact, when we got them in the mail, we left them in the refrigerator in storage for about 2 weeks. So we know that it takes a little bit longer. It took us a few extra batches to really get it going and start to see the fermentation process working, a little bit of carbonation, and to get the flavor that we wanted.
Yeah, so if that happens, that's totally normal. Maybe it's just them shipping in the mail, they're under stress and they get into their fridge. You'll just have to wait a few batches until they really get going into high gear. So let's get into actually making some, because I want to try this. And you are going to be so shocked at how crazy simple this is.
It really is. So let's get right into it. First thing you'll need is some sugar. We're going to use 1/4 cup of raw cane sugar today. Now, questions we get all the time: what kind of sugar can I use? Especially for this water kefir, you're going to want to use a sugar source. Like, I'm talking about brown sugar, raw cane sugar, not one of those sweeteners that are actually sugar-free like a stevia. You do not want to use those. This is going to need that actual sugar that the bacteria can feed on in your ferment.
Now, these are living organisms that, imagine you're out running a marathon and you just need some fuel and somebody just hands you some water. You know, it's not going to do it.
Not going to cut it. So our 4th cup of sugar, put that right into our 1-quart mason jar. Next, we need to add non-chlorinated water to our quart jar.
And you might hear in other recipes about heating up a pot of water to be able to dissolve the sugar and everything, but we're doing the very easy method where you just combine them and then stir to dissolve. To keep your water kefir grains healthy, don't just use sugar water, but every so often, maybe every few batches, you'll want to add a mineral supply. And this is just to kind of round out the diet of the water kefir grains. You can either use a couple raisins, a pinch of baking soda, a pinch of sea salt, a bit of molasses, or even eggshells.
In this batch, we're just going to use a pinch of sea salt. You'll notice the color is a little bit of a light brown color, and that's really just because of the minerals right in our raw cane sugar. So there's really enough minerals in there, but every so often, just add something slightly different. Just make sure not to over mineralize it. You don't want to add too much of something.
It's time to add our water kefir grains.
Woo! It's the highlight of this event.
You know, I would say it almost smells like a ginger ale. A little bit.
It does.
Yeah, it smells very, very pleasant.
These are actually, they're edible. It kind of falls apart. They're very delicate. So when we go to add these in, we're going to make sure not to over stir it. I mean, they're edible and they'd be really good for you. But of course, I would only eat them if you have a ton extra, because you're going to be using them for the drink.
You know, actually, I would say that doesn't even really taste like much.
And since we've actually already made a few batches to get it reactivated, we've doubled this amount within 3 batches. So it does grow, hence why you'll never need to order it again. Next, it's time to add 1/4 cup of water kefir grains to our sugar water. And we're just going to give it one light stir.
Now, the next step is we're going to ferment this drink. And there's 2 different methods to do this. There's anaerobic fermentation and there's aerobic fermentation. With anaerobic fermentation, you don't want any kind of oxygen to get into the jars. We like to use these fermentation lids, and they're just silicone. They have a little slot on the top, even more foolproof. These lids where you screw on and there's a little hole on top, and you can put a cork with a water airlock, so that's guaranteed you're not going to get any oxygen in. And the reason you would want to do anaerobic is maybe if you don't really like that vinegar like smell and taste, you would want to make sure there's no oxygen to get in to turn any of the alcohol into vinegar in the first place. But traditionally, when you're making water kefir, you just put the cloth on top and go right through the fermentation process.
And that way, it's like a light kombucha to me. And now we're ready to ferment. And this is the primary fermentation stage. So typically we would let this sit on the counter at room temperature for between 24 and 48 hours. During this time, the grains are going to eat the sugars, turn it into lactic acid, and also turn it into all the healthy bacteria and yeast that we're looking for in this water kefir. And don't forget to write the date on a little sticky of when you started the water kefir so you don't forget how long it's been fermenting.
So since we already made a few batches, here's how it went so you know what to expect. After storing the grains for 2 weeks in the refrigerator, we finally make our first batch, using this recipe with molasses as our mineral source. After 2 days, we give it a taste test and it's still very sweet, so we remove the grains and let it ferment longer in bottles. We start batch number 2 right away with sugar, raisins for our mineral source, and lime rind for flavor. We'll check on batch number 2 a couple days later. After batch number 2 has fermented for 48 hours, we start to see a few small bubbles. It's time to strain off the grains, pick out the fruit and raisins, and bottle it for secondary fermentation. Since our water kefir grains are done, we're ready to start a third batch.
For this one, our mineral source is going to be a pinch of baking soda.
We add the grains and we'll check on it in 2 days. After 3 days, we check on our first batch with the molasses. There's not much fermentation happening. It's flat and still tastes very sweet. So this batch of water kefir has been fermenting for 48 hours, so 2 full days. And now we are ready to strain off the grains and move on to secondary fermentation.
Look at all those grains. Woohoo! Okay, I'm gonna set these aside for future use.
So during the secondary fermentation process, we don't need the grains in there any longer because this is already full of probiotics and they're ready to ferment. The other reason for this is at this stage we can also add fruit. And if you had the grains in there and put the fruit in there and then you strained it all off, it would be a nightmare to separate all the grains from, say, like blueberries or any other fruit. What we're going to do now, though, we're not going to add any fruit. We're actually moving on to the bottling process. But if you don't like the fizziness of more of a soda type drink, you don't even have to use these bottles to pressurize them. You can just do a secondary fermentation in the mason jar itself. And on top of that, after 48 hours, you could actually just be done and drink it as it is, and it'll be a little bit sweeter. But we like to move on to secondary fermentation because then it tastes a little bit tangier, a little bit more fermented, and we also like the carbonation.
You're going to want to use pressure-safe bottles. That's very important because the pressure is going to continue to build inside as it continues to ferment. Now, it's not going to ferment very quickly. Water kefir typically will not, unless you have fruit. We like to use a plastic tester bottle so that you can squeeze it and determine how much pressure is building up inside of these. And if you want to learn more about tester bottles and the bottling process in general, we're going to put a card right here that takes you to one of our videos on our top Q&A on all kinds of things bottling. So let's start filling. And if you're not using a plastic tester bottle that makes it easier to tell how much pressure is building inside, then you definitely want to release the pressure by burping them every 12 to 24 hours. If you're using fruit, it's more important to burp them more frequently because you don't want them to explode on you.
We are ready for a taste test. This is our second batch of water kefir that we made. And this one we actually used a lime rind. So it should have like a citrusy flavor. It's actually starting to feel a little solid there. Probably get some carbonation too.
But some beautiful colors. I can't wait to try it.
Here we go. Wine glasses, so sophisticated.
I know, well, why not for our water kefir?
I taste the zest from the lime. It's very good. It's like a subtle citrusy type flavor. That is very refreshing.
Really, like a refreshing flavored water.
Yeah, cheers.
It's so good.
Very good. Another success. And this just goes to show there's so many different starter cultures and so many different types of drinks that you can make, and they're all so different.
I have these extra kefir grains right here. What are we gonna do with them? Do another type of water kefir. Maybe you try a different type of mineral, you try a different type of fruit in secondary fermentation, so they're ready to use right now. Or you can store them in the refrigerator in a sugar water solution.
If you're going to do that, you're going to use 1 tablespoon of sugar per 1 cup of water. And the important thing is when you have your kefir grains in the jar, you want to make sure they're submerged and they're not sticking above the water line. If you want to store it in there for a long period of time, you're probably going to want to freshen up the water a little bit. So maybe every couple weeks or so, you want to strain it off and then add some new sugar water to it.
Or you could actually dry them as well. That's probably not going to be the most common way of storing them, but it's something that you could do if you wanted to. It would store longer.
Yeah. And you might even buy some that are dried and you would just rehydrate them. But if you want to dry them, you could use a dehydrator. Make sure to set the temperature low enough to where you're not going to actually cook them because you don't want to kill them. Don't forget, this is a living organism here. And also, it doesn't taste very alcoholic at all. It tastes very, very light.
Very light. Hydrometers measure the alcohol by determining how much sugar has been eaten up. By checking the gravity reading before and after fermentation, it'll give us a good idea. I think the reading is 1.024. After 48 hours of fermentation, let's see if there's any alcohol in our water kefir. 1.022. So not quite 0.3%. Not very much, but let's try after 3 more days. Let's see how much alcohol is in it now. We've got a reading of 1.022. That's actually what we got last time 3 days ago, which means that the alcohol content has not increased. Either we don't have a very active water kefir right now and it's just not really growing too much, or truly this water kefir has very, very little to no alcohol, because that means we're still at only 0.3%.
If you guys love water kefir and you want to try this recipe, be sure to give us a like. Don't forget to subscribe. We have a lot more recipes and videos coming. Share this with your friends and get out there
and create some culture.
Cheers. So sophisticated.
I really love this.
Kefir.
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 Kefir.